Good morning, students. The topic for today is we start with embodiment. There are 4 or 5 topics that we have to complete today. So let's see what is embodiment. Okay, it's a little difficult concept for you to understand. Embodiment means, to tell it in simple words, if what is happening to your body, that is embodiment. Okay, it is the experience. For example, I'll just give you an example so that you understand easily. A person who is working in the field, he will have hands that are rough because he is working with hard materials, like he is holding sand, he is holding the rocks, he is pulling out the weeds, he is planting plants. So that is what a farmer does. So he does a lot of work with the hands. So looking at his hands, you will know that he is a person who works hard in the field. Same way, if somebody looks at your body, or if you yourself feel something in your body, then it will show that you have whatever disease that you have undergone. So that is embodiment. It is an experience of your body. So each of us have different kinds of bodies. So suppose a person has you all know that the bone in the chest is called the sternum. So somebody has a cut in the sternum, we all know that he has undergone a cardiac surgery. If you already don't know, where do they cut for cardiac surgery? The bone which is right in the center of your heart. That is, there is a bone, you can feel the bone, and if that is cut, you know that the person has undergone cardiac surgery. So like that, each experience will create something in the body. So it is an experience through which the body lives. So that is the meaning of embodiment. Embodiment is a lived experience of our bodies in the world, including our emotional relations with our similarly embodied beings or agents. So it is a relationship with other people who are also similar. Each person who is living in this world has gone through this experience of embodiment. That is, all the diseases that we undergo in our body, they leave some sort of residue, as we call it, or they leave a trace in the body. Okay, suppose you drink coffee from a cup. After you drink the coffee, if somebody picks up the cup, can they find out that you have drunk coffee? They can smell the cup and they can see the sides that there are traces of coffee drops. So then you know, till you wash it, before you wash it, if somebody lifts the cup, they know that you have drunk coffee from the cup. So same way, looking at our bodies, we will be able to realize whatever diseases that the body has gone through. Okay, so I already told the example of the farmer and his hands. The other example is a weightlifter. If you touch the biceps or the muscles of a weightlifter, you will know that the person has been lifting weights. Same way, if you look at the eyes of a tailor, you will know that the tailor's eyes are dim. So you know that the person has been straining his eyes. Same way, emotionally, when children are there, if you take care of the children and give them a lot of love, then the child, when it grows, will also be a happy child. Same way, if somebody is being abused as a child, then the child is likely to get diabetes and cardiovascular diseases, because the child has undergone a lot of stress in the young age. So based on what the body undergoes during each phase of life, there will be traces of it as diseases later on. Okay, I hope you understood this concept. I have tried to make it as simple as possible. The next thing is, just like I said, in health and illness, embodiment can leave a trace of the sickness that the person has undergone. Okay, so if you undergo chronic illness, we already talked about chronic illness. Chronic illness like arthritis, that means the person will be limping. Just by looking at the person, you will know that the person has undergone a disease called arthritis. Same way, a person who has undergone a heart surgery, just by the walk the person will be walking slowly, they will not be running, they will not be leading a normal life. So looking at the person's body, you will know that the person has undergone some disease, and you can even identify the disease. So same way in leprosy, the scars which are left by the surgeries and the wounds and the disability of leprosy, all these are signs of embodiment. So even after the disease has been cured, you are giving multi-drug therapy and all the bacteria is dead, but still the person will have the other consequences. Like, you can, by looking at the person, you will know that he is suffering from disability, though the disease is gone. So that is embodiment. So there are three types of embodiment: physical, cognitive, or emotional. And two types: physical and emotional. Emotional can also be called as cognitive. So physical means you can look at the signs on the body. Physical body, you will find that there are changes. Emotional changes you will be able to understand when you talk to the person. Okay, so for example, when a disease occurs, like through bacteria or chemicals or due to an accident, you easily understand that how the disease has been caused in the body and how the changes in the body have occurred. But how can you understand that a person who is highly stressed in the workplace has undergone a heart attack? We all know heart attack sometimes is caused by stress in the workplace. So how does it happen? So that is called embodiment. The changes in the body due to physical as well as emotional occurrences in the towards the body. So when you are affected through a disease, or when you are affected through emotional problems, then your body will have some effects, and these effects which are caused by the triggers is called embodiment. Okay, so it is an experience of the body to some external event like a disease or emotional problems. Okay, so hope you understood this concept. If you don't understand, when you come back, you can ask doubts in that also. Next, we come to a simple concept. This is very easy to understand. It is the practitioner client relationship. It is also called sometimes as doctor patient relationship or the patient physician relationship. Okay, all three mean the same. So it is one common question which comes in your exams. So these days we do not call patients as patients, we call them as clients, because they are taking a service from the doctor. Okay, so the patient physician relationship is between two people. One is the patient, the other is the doctor. So sometimes it can also be considered patient medical sociologist, patient nurse relationship. So based on what we are studying in the doctor patient relationship, you should be able to write whichever question comes, whether it is a sociologist and the patient, nurse and the patient, or any health worker with the patient. So the relationship is always the same with mild variations. So each person, when they meet each other, when the patient meets the practitioner or health worker, it is a social situation. Man is a social animal. So when two human beings meet, that is a social situation. So what happens in this social situation? Usually a patient meets the doctor or nurse or medical sociologist when they have problems in the body. That is, when they become sick, they come to the doctor. So that means the sick person does not have a normal function in the body. There is something abnormal. So they come to get help from the doctor. So when they come to the doctor, there are two ways in which there is interaction. One is the doctor-centered interaction. The other is the patient-centered interaction. We will see what each one is. So in the doctor-centered interaction, it is the doctor who does most of the talking. It is something like a paternalistic. Okay, so that means how a parent and child relationship. In your house, who talks to you the most? Your parents do the talking. You listen and do what your parents tell you to do. Same way, doctor-centered relationship is just like that. The doctor is the caregiver. He checks you, he diagnoses the disease and he tells the treatment, and the patient is usually a passive person who keeps quiet and only answers the doctor and takes home whatever advice the doctor has told. So here the doctor has an authority and authoritative style, he deals with the patient. So that is doctor centered interaction. But these days, more and more patients, they, if they find that the doctor has made a mistake in the diagnosis or in the treatment, the doctors are taken to the court. Their patients put a case against the doctors. So what happens is, more and more doctors, they become very defensive. What is defensive? They diagnose the disease only based on the various medical tests, blood test, x-ray, all this is done, and then only based on the results of the test the doctor gives the diagnosis. Okay, so now let us see what patient centered care is all about. These days, from doctor centered treatment, it has become patient centered treatment. So patient is given the priority. So these days, if you see patients, they ask a lot of questions to the doctors. 20 years back, patients never used to question the doctor, they used to go and listen to the doctor. Now it is an open communication between the patient and the doctor. The doctor tries to listen much more than talking. So based on whatever the patient tells and the patient's experience, then the doctor decides what is the best treatment for the patient. Even here, the doctor does not tell the treatment, he asks the patient how best he can do the treatment. You would have seen in the leprosy OPD, if you were first year when you went to postings, the physiotherapists tell what the patient has to do for self-care. At the same time, the patient is asked what kind of life he lives, what kind of house he lives in, whether he will be able to wear footwear all through the day. So the patient gives a lot more information to the doctor. So together, both the doctor and the patient, they decide which is the best way of treating the patient. This is usually true about the chronic illnesses. Okay, this is called as concordance. There is a topic on concordance later on, so we will see what concordance is all about. Concordance means not just deciding something for the patient, but along with the patient deciding on the treatment. So it is dual, both the doctor and the patient together, they decide about the treatment. So this can be told as no decision about me without me. So patients usually say without them the doctor cannot take any decisions about them. So it's like the patient saying no decision about me without me. So the patients are given more information and they are involved in the treatment. So this is the patient centered approach. So now we'll see the advantages and disadvantages. Patient centered approach has a lot more advantages for individual patients and the healthcare system, because the patient itself is involved in the treatment, they will take care of their body much more. See, as a child, your parents would have told you not to go out in the rain, not to go out in the sun, not to go to your friend's house. Did you listen 100% to everything with a happy mind? No. You would have, even if you are forced to do it, you will not comply with it properly. So same way, if the doctor tells the patient what to do, sometimes patients do not listen. But on the other hand, if there is a discussion between the doctor and the patient, and then the patient decides which is the best outcome or best treatment for him, then the patient will undergo that treatment in a much better way. So that is the advantage of patient centered approach. But as you know, this will take a long time. So each person to get treated will take a long time if the patient centered approach is used. Whereas the doctor centered approach, the doctor can see the patient in 5 minutes and give the treatment and send the patient off. So but if the treatment has to be effective, it should be patient centered approach. So that is the advantage of patient centered approach. Okay, so we'll go to the next topic, which is uncertainty. Okay, it's a common English word. If somebody asks you, will you give me money, you will say certainly. That means 100% you are confident of giving. The opposite of certainty or is uncertainty, means you don't know. Suppose somebody asks you, when does college reopen after coronavirus, you will say I don't know, because there is uncertainty. Okay, so that in the clinical setting or in a doctor patient relationship, what is uncertainty? So that is what we are going to see. Okay, so there are different phases where there can be uncertainty. When the doctor diagnoses the disease, the doctor may be uncertain about the disease. Okay, suppose I have sneezing, suppose I have throat pain, I go to the doctor, I have fever also. Now the doctor is confused whether I have coronavirus or whether I have common cold. 2 years back, if you had fever and sneezing, what will the doctor tell you? He'll say you have cold. That was certainty. Today, if you go to the doctor with the same symptoms, the doctor will say you may have coronavirus, you may have normal cold. So that is uncertainty. So there is uncertainty in the diagnosis in clinical area. Same way, after the diagnosis is done, there is uncertainty during the treatment also. So because the doctor does not know which treatment to give, not just for coronavirus but for a lot of other diseases, because all patients with the same disease will not have same symptoms. Each person will have different symptoms. Some may have severe symptoms, some may have mild symptoms, some may have a particular symptom, others will not have that symptom, though it is the same disease. So all this causes uncertainty with the doctor. Okay, so during the communication with the doctor and the patient, the doctor is always listening to diagnose the disease, but sometimes they may not be able to diagnose, and that causes uncertainty. Next thing, in the prognosis, what is prognosis? Prognosis is whether the person will get well or will not get well. So in a cancer OPD, suppose a patient is diagnosed with cancer, the patient's first question will be, doctor, will I get well? So the doctor cannot say he will get well or he will not get well, because even the doctor does not know. So that is another clinical uncertainty. So clinical uncertainty occurs in the diagnosis, prognosis, or in the treatment. In any area it can happen. Okay, so let us see how the doctor will answer the patient. The doctor will answer, here we can see there are two ways in which doctor deals with this. The doctor will either tell the patient that he does not know. That is called admission of uncertainty. So that means the doctor himself is telling, I do not know. That is the truth. So that is admission of uncertainty. Or sometimes what happens is, the doctor will withhold the information. Even though the doctor knows that the patient is going to die or patient is going to have serious disease, the doctor will not tell the patient. He will hide it or delay it, because the doctor does not want to tell negative things to the patient. So this is called dissimulation. Okay, the doctor hides the information or withholds the information from the patient. This may not be always right, but to prevent emotional problems, the doctor may hide. Okay, the other thing that can happen is, sometimes the doctors may be certain about an outcome. For example, they may know that a cancer patient will die, but they will act as if they do not know. Okay, so the first case we saw that doctors themselves don't know. Here the doctors know the outcome, but they hide it. There are two reasons why a doctor may not tell the patient about his condition. The first reason is, the doctor does not want to give a bad news to the patient. So to avoid bad news being given to the patient of negative diagnosis, negative treatment outcome, the doctor will hide the diagnosis or prognosis and act as if he does not know. That is uncertainty. The next thing is the doctors do not want to deal with the emotional situations of bad prognosis. For example, if the doctor has to tell a cancer patient, I am sorry, you will die in another 1 year, so that is a bad prognosis for the patient. So the doctor does not want to deal with the emotional problem, because immediately the patient will start crying, the relative will start crying. So to prevent all this, the doctor will tell that he does not know. Okay, so let's see why you are studying this in your syllabus. For example, if the doctor tells does not know, then it becomes the role of the medical sociologist to tell the patient sometimes, okay, about the bad prognosis, that the patient will not get better. So you have to counsel the family and the individual. So that is why uncertainty is part of your syllabus. The third part of uncertainty is existential uncertainty. Here the patient experience when the cause of the illness is unknown. Okay, the patient experiences some illness, but the cause of the illness is not known. So here the doctor is not feeling uncertain, but the patient is feeling uncertain. He does not know why he is got a particular disease. For example, a person who does not smoke at all, that person gets lung cancer. Does he know why he got lung cancer? He does not know. So that is existential uncertainty, not knowing the cause of their illness. Though they experience the disease, they do not know why they got the disease. That is the third type of uncertainty. Okay, so here what we are studying is a lot of chronic patients, they have more of these uncertain factors. In an acute disease, if it's a short term disease, then it's easy to diagnose usually, and the treatment, and the patient gets well. But in a lot of chronic patients, uncertainty is very common. They do not know the cause of the disease, they do not know how long they will suffer from the disease, and whether they will become better. So all these are uncertain in chronic diseases. Okay, the next topic is compliance and concordance. This is very important, especially compliance. As a health professional, compliance is used in a lot of research. Okay, compliance, let me give a simple example in your class. Suppose I give homework and you do the homework, that means it is compliance. Okay, if I give the homework and you have not done the homework, that is non-compliance. Okay, so I hope you understood. When a patient listens to the doctor and takes the treatment properly, that is compliance. When a doctor tells the patient to take a treatment but the patient has not taken the treatment properly, then it is non-compliance. Okay, so I hope you understood compliance and non-compliance. Next we'll go to concordance. We already saw concordance in the previous chapter in this same video. Concordance is always when the doctor and the patient discuss with each other about the treatment and then decide on the treatment. For example, if I give you a homework and then I ask you, will you be able to finish the homework tomorrow? You will say, no sir, tomorrow I am going to do some other work. Can I finish 3 days from now? Then I tell you, okay, you finish in 3 days. So there is more chance of you finishing the homework in 3 days if we both discuss together than if I tell you tomorrow you have to finish the homework. So same thing when it happens in the healthcare, it is called concordance. When there is a discussion between the doctor and the patient and then the treatment is decided, that is concordance. Okay, so compliance means patient's behavior coincides with the medical treatment or medical health advice. Okay, so this is a very important this thing. Patient's behavior coincides with medical or health advice, that is compliance. If the patient's behavior does not coincide, then it is non-compliance. Okay, so hope you understood. Here again, this is a paternalistic relationship. That is a traditional thing which has been happening over the many hundreds of years, where the doctors are in authority and they tell what the patient has to do. So, if the patient does what the doctor tells him to do, that is compliance. The patient does not do, that is non compliance. So, it is like a parent telling a child what to do and what not to do. Same thing, the doctor tells the patient what to do and what not to do. Okay, here let us see another example. The treatment for leprosy is 1 year. Okay, the patient has to take 12 doses of multi drug therapy every day for 365 days. The patient has to take a medicine. Okay, is it easy? No, it is difficult. Some patients may forget, some patients may not get the medicine on time. So there are a lot of issues. So compliance is very less. Usually the compliance is around 50% only. There are other reasons for low compliance. One is illiteracy, because the patient does not know and does not understand the importance of medicine, does not take the medicine properly. Then the low socioeconomic status of the patient. So because the treatment is for 1 year, the patient has to come every month to the hospital to buy the medicine. So if they are very poor, if they don't have money for the bus fare, money for the medicines, they will not take treatment. Okay. Another thing is the long treatment duration. Whenever you have to take treatment for long time, lot of people stop treatment sometime in the middle. Especially if they get better, they stop. If they get worse also, they stop. So remember carefully, these are very, very important things when you do your research topics. A patient stops the medicine if they are cured. A patient stops the medicine if they are getting worse, even though the treatment duration is for long time. Okay. So compliance will be better in diseases that are acute, because treatment is short term. Other things is high literacy and better socioeconomic status will improve the compliance. Okay. So let us see what are the other factors that lead to non-compliance later in this topic. So here we have two examples. Okay. In example 1, there is a lady with diabetes who has been told to take medicines other than changing her diet pattern and also doing exercise. The lady did not do the exercises, she did not follow the diet. So initially the healthcare worker tried to do compliance. He told the lady what to do. Then when the healthcare worker sat with the lady and discussed why she did not have a separate diet, why she did not do exercises, the lady told, if the family has to cook for her separately, then there is stigma, there is extra work for the family members. So she did not want them to do. Same way, when she was asked why she did not do exercise, she told she already suffered from arthritis and the pain is severe, so she could not follow. Okay, so as a health worker, what will be your solution for this lady? You have to modify the protocol to suit the needs of the individual. So that is concordance. When you sit with the patient and talk and then finally decide on the treatment, that is concordance. So next example, a leprosy patient is told to wear footwear to protect the feet from getting ulcers. If they walk barefoot in hot objects or sharp objects, they will get ulcers or wounds. So in spite of that advice and in spite of being given free footwear, the patient does not wear footwear. Why is that? Because the patient cannot wear the footwear inside the house, they cannot wear it in the field, other people may tease them for wearing different footwear. So these are all social problems. So once they are addressed by means of concordance, then the compliance will improve. So I hope you understood the difference between compliance and concordance and which is better. Concordance is always better, though the health worker, because of the time shortage, we usually give advice to the patient, and that is we hope them to follow, that is compliance. So let's see what are the advantages of compliance. Patient is here, compliance, patient is told what is good. If they follow, then it is good treatment. It saves time for the healthcare workers. The disadvantage of compliance is patient may not follow treatment based on what you have told, because they may have their own problems which prevents them from following what you tell them. Then the compliance is poor. The advantage of concordance is You discuss with the patient on which method of treatment is the best, so the patient will adhere or follow the treatment in a much better way. But the problem of concordance is it takes a long time for the patient to be convinced. So the health worker will be able to treat only fewer patients. I hope it's a simple topic. I hope you understood it well. So, based on compliance, we already have studied compliance is based on the medical model of biomedical model of health. As a medical sociologist, you have to follow the social model of health. We already studied about biomedical and social model of health. In a biomedical model of health, the doctor has authority. It's a doctor-centered patient approach, and they tell what the patient has to do. Whereas concordance is a social model of health, where the patient and the health worker discusses the outcome. It is a patient-centered approach. Hope you are able to link all the things which you have studied together through this topic. Okay. There is one more assignment which you can do once you are in the hospital. It need not be done at home. Once you come back to Karigiri, you can ask 5 leprosy patients in the OPD if they are regular for treatment. If anyone is irregular, then find out the cause of the irregularity. Then make a plan on how the patient can become regular in the treatment. Okay, so that is your assignment once you come back here. The next topic is quality of life. I already have talked when you were here in college about quality of life. Quality of life is very important for research when you do research. Okay, usually quality of life is assessed through a questionnaire. So let's see what quality of life is. Quality of life, it refers to the individual's social, emotional and physical well-being. Okay, so the patient has to be socially well, emotionally well and physically also well, in spite of the disease. Okay, the person may be suffering from a disease, but in spite of that, this patient must be socially, emotionally and physically well, and they should have personal satisfaction with their life. Sometimes even a normal person who is not sick, we are not happy with our life because our parents did not give money, because the bus is not come on time, because you are given a lot of tests in college. So all this prevent you from being happy. But even in spite of sickness, some patients are socially, emotionally and physically well. Then that means their quality of life is very good. If they are emotionally, socially or physically not well, then that means they have poor quality of life. Okay, so we can actually, based on 3 things, we can assess the quality of life: belonging, being and becoming. Belonging means, first we will see being. Being means how they are. Being means being present, how they are physically. So that means physical being. Then their psychological being and their spiritual being. So there are 3 things. First, to check the quality of life, we are looking at 3 things: belonging, being and becoming. In being, there are 3 things: physical being, psychological being and spiritual being. So in physical being, we are looking at the health of the person, hygiene of the person, nutrition of the person, exercise, clothing, appearance and how they groom themselves. Grooming means combing the hair, putting a proper dress, all these things. So all this, if you are not happy, if you are not physically well, then you will not eat properly, your food is not good, you will not exercise properly. So that means when you are physically not well, all this will get affected. Okay, so if these are not affected, that means the patient is having a good quality of life. Okay, so let's see the second aspect of the being, that is the psychological being. Here the person will have good cognition or understanding, memory, feelings, self-esteem, self-concept, self-control. All this you have studied in the first year. So if these are good in a person, that means the person is psychologically having good quality of life. If these are poor, then the person is having psychologically poor quality of life. The third thing is the spiritual being. Here we see the personal values, standards of conduct and spiritual beliefs. Okay, will you go to a church or temple or mosque if you are unhappy with life? Most probably you may not go. That means you are spiritually not having a poor quality of life. Whereas if you are happy with everybody, happy with the world, happy with your studies, happy with everything, happy with your health, then you will have a relationship with God and have a good quality of life. So that is what is the first thing, that is being. Next we'll see what belonging is. There are, again, in belonging there are three types. One is the physical belonging, social belonging, and community belonging. So belonging means where you belong, where you live. So physical belonging is your house where you live, and anybody who lives in a house, they also have other places where they belong, in their own church or temple or mosque, in their workplace, or in the school or college. So if you feel happy and belong to these places, then your physical belonging is good and you have a good quality of life. Suppose your family is not respecting you, your classmates in college or school is not respecting you, they are not talking to you, that means you don't belong there properly. That may be because you have a particular disease, they may not talk to you, so that means you have poor quality of life. So that is how physical belonging plays a role in the quality of life. Next we'll see what social belonging is. Social belonging means your relationship with the family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. So this is based on the individual's relationship. The first thing, physical belonging, was with the group. Here with individual people, that is your family members, friends, co-workers, neighbors. So if you have a good relationship with them, and then you have a good quality of life. Suppose you have leprosy, and because of that your family, friends, they do not talk to you, they keep you outside the house, that means your social belonging is not good and you have a poor quality of life. I hope you understand the difference between good quality of life and poor quality of life in each of these headings. Okay. The third thing is community belonging. Just like physical belonging, social belonging, within your community, if you have a good income, health, employment, and if you participate in educational or recreational programs, then you have community belonging. Suppose your disease, suppose you have AIDS, then what will happen? The people will not allow you to participate in the community events. Your neighbors will not allow you to participate in the recreational programs in the community. That means you have poor quality of life. Okay. So the next part we come is the becoming. So here again there are three things. One is the practical becoming, the next one is leisure becoming, and growth becoming. So practical becoming, in domestic activities, in your own house or as a volunteer activity, are you able to achieve? That is practical becoming. If you are having a normal life in this, then you have good quality of life. If you are not able to achieve it, then you have poor quality of life. Then the leisure becoming, how you evaluate your own. Okay, here you evaluate your own relaxation and stress reduction. So once you go home from college, what do? You watch TV, you lie down on your bed, you play with your cell phone. That means you are happy and you are leisurely reducing your stress. But at the same time, if you have serious illnesses, if you are having a big headache, then will you be able to go and play in your cell phone or watch TV? No, you will just sleep. That means your leisure is poor. That means you have a poor quality of life. Then the final one is growth becoming. Here, improving your own knowledge and skill and adapting to change. If you are able to do it properly, then you have good quality of life. But suppose you have a disease which is preventing you from improving your knowledge, improving your skills. Suppose you have fracture in your hand, and because of the fracture you are not able to improve your cricket skills. That means you have poor quality of life. Okay, so this is why these 9 areas will decide whether you have a good quality of life or poor quality of life. So we can assess the quality of life based on the quality of life questionnaire. I am not going to go in detail because it's not very important for you, but if you, when you're, it will be useful for you when you do your research. based on the patient's quality of life, you can come to a conclusion whether the disease is affecting the person very much or less. So there are, based on the 9 things that we have studied already, the questionnaire will have different questions. So that will help us to understand the well-being of the person, participation of the person in the social society, and how the person is feeling, whether the person is feeling mentally troubled, fatigue, pain, emotional distress. All this can be identified through the questions. When you were in first year and you went for posting in physio department, you would have seen participation scale, which they were doing for leprosy patients. So that is another method of studying the quality of life. If the patient is able to participate properly in various activities in the community and in the family, then they have good quality of life. So similarly, you can use this quality of life scale for physical, psychological and social functioning. You can use all 3, or you can take any one aspect, just the social functioning or the physical functioning or the psychological functioning, and see for each disease whether the patient is having good quality of life or bad quality of life. So this will be very useful for your research, not just in your college but also in your career. The last topic in this chapter is dying trajectories. Okay, the name may sound very difficult. What is a trajectory? Okay, but it's a simple topic. Okay, all of us have to die someday or the other. Okay, sometimes patients who are sick will die quickly. Sometimes patients who are sick, like with cancer, they will have a very slow and painful death. So the process of dying and the speed, the duration and the type of dying is all called as dying trajectory. For example, if there is a race track for the car to go, the car has to go on that. Sometimes the car may, if you have seen on TV, sometimes the car will go to the side, it won't go on the straight track. So that means the trajectory has changed. So same way, the way in which a person's life is going and how they are going to die is called as dying trajectory. This is mainly for diseases which can be life threatening in acute cases, and chronic terminal illness like cancer, sometimes if the cancer is not cured. Okay, so this mainly discusses how long it will take for the patient to die and what kind of death, whether it is a fast or a slow death. So that is dying trajectory. Every sick patient, you would have seen mainly on TV, especially in movies, when the doctor tells the family, we tried our best but we cannot do anything, the patient is already died. That is one of the communication to the patient's family in acute diseases. Sometimes the doctor will tell, we did what we could, the patient is alive, but nothing more in our hands, you pray to God. So this is the other aspect. So especially in the last hours of the patient's life, what will happen is, sometimes we will know that the patient is very sick and they are going to die, and the time that is spent watching the patient die is called death watch. The time that is taken from the time doctor tells the patient is going to die till the time the patient actually dies is called death watch, and the family members will be waiting, trying, praying so that the patient will get better. Sometimes they will realize the patient is dying and will be looking at the patient to see if they are alive. So that is death watch. So let us see the different types of dying trajectories. The first one is called surprise trajectory. What is a surprise trajectory? Here the patient dies a very unexpected death. Okay, for example, a patient goes to the hospital for fever and suddenly the patient dies in the hospital. So that is surprise trajectory. You never expected the patient to die because you thought it is a small disease, but finally the person dies. That is surprise trajectory. The next one is short term reprieve or suspended sentence trajectory. Here The person is sent home, the patient is sent home, and the patient does not die for some time, and then he may seem to be dying. Okay, here it's like up and down. Patient is sent home from the hospital, telling, the doctor will tell, we cannot do anything. Then after the patient is brought home, suddenly the patient becomes better. You will think that the patient will survive. Then again the patient will become worse. Then again the patient becomes better. So it is like climbing a hill, coming down the hill, climbing the hill, coming down the hill. So this is called short term reprieve or suspended sentence trajectory. Means for a short time the patient gets better, then it gets worse, then he gets better. So this is short term reprieve or suspended sentence trajectory. The third thing is lingering trajectory. Here the patient has been told that he will die. Like example, AIDS, where the treatment has not been effective, cancer, where the treatment has not been effective, the patient is dying, and the doctors have told there is no chance of survival. So it is a slow death. The patient will not die immediately like a heart attack. The patient will take a long time to die. Okay, so this is lingering trajectory. Lingering always means slowly or waiting. So that is the word lingering. So that the death is also like that. It will not happen suddenly, it will happen slowly. And all these trajectories, surprise trajectory, lingering trajectory, where do they happen? They happen in the home, they happen in the hospital, they happen in the nursing home, or in a hospice. Hospice is a place where terminally ill patients are kept. So these trajectories, or people may die in all these places. Okay, so why do you have this in your syllabus? This you have in your syllabus because you may have to deal with such people. You may have to explain to people who have suddenly died why the person died. As a medical sociologist, you will be told to deal with the patient's anger. A person went to the hospital with fever, suddenly the patient has died. So the patient's family members are very angry, they are breaking the hospital. You have to explain what happened to the patient. That is surprise trajectory has happened. Sometimes the patient is going to die slowly, so you have to make the patient's family members get ready for the death in lingering trajectory. So this is why this is in your syllabus. Then there are two more trajectories. One is the expected quick trajectory. Here there is very less time for the people to mourn. Mourn means feel sad. A person who is going to die, if you tell in advance to the family members, at least they will go and talk to the person. Okay, if there is no time, then there is less time for mourning. So here there is a sudden death. Okay, so here what will happen is the family members will become very angry, and all the routine activities of the hospital will be affected because there has been a sudden death. Okay, so here what the doctor does is, usually they will give artificial respiration like a ventilator or other means to keep the person alive. The person is maybe brain dead but not physically dead. So this, the person who is supposed to die quickly, artificially that person's life is prolonged. So that is the expected quick trajectory. And here the issue of euthanasia is there, because the person is living, you have made him live, but the person is actually maybe brain dead or something like that. Okay, and the next thing is unexpected quick trajectory. So what is unexpected quick trajectory? This is the most difficult to manage, where the patient has died very suddenly, and for all these dying trajectories were recorded by two people called Glaser and Strauss. What they told? They told usually the hospital where the patient has died suddenly, they try to act as if they are reviving. This you would have seen in some movie also. The patient is already died, but what does the hospital do? They rush here and there, they run into the operation theatre, they take the patient into the operation theatre, but they do not do surgery because they know the patient is already died. But the family members, to convince them that the hospital is doing too much of hard work to save the patient, they do all these activities. Okay, even a woman in childbirth, sometimes women who give birth, they die suddenly. That is very unexpected because there may be no complications, suddenly the patient will die. So what will the family members think? They will think that there is negligence on the part of the hospital. So this is what happens in unexpected quick trajectory. So it is an unexpected quick death. So here the hospital is blamed by the family members. To avoid that, the hospital takes a lot of effort. Okay, so the hospital will try to distract, to manage the emotional response of the family members. Then after a period of time, maybe after 1 hour or 2 hours of running here and there and telling the family members, suddenly the patient has had some complications. Finally they will break the bad news telling the patient is died. So that is unexpected quick trajectory. So hope understood all these trajectories. One is surprise trajectory, short term reprieve trajectory, lingering trajectory, expected quick trajectory, and unexpected quick trajectory. These are the different types of dying trajectories. Okay, with this we have come to the end of the third chapter. We will go on to the fourth chapter the coming week. Study well, you will have a test very soon next week. Bye.